So you're going to write a paper on a topic of your choice that connects to the math that is part of the IB curriculum. Okay? Why? To apply the mathematics you've learned to other situations. Okay? Chances are, 10 years from now, most of you will have forgotten how to use inverse norm on your calculator. But none of you will forget what you wrote your paper on. So as far as long-term learning goes, there's going to be a lot of long-term learning. And the hope is to appreciate moral, social, ethical implications of math. And they're not, the why is not to develop a hate for writing papers about math. That's not the goal. But, yeah. Okay, so we want to gain some sort of appreciation. You will, after it's done, appreciate that you've done it. That sometimes is the case with a lot of assignments that you do. It's not necessarily that enjoyable while you're doing it, but once it's done, you feel good about what you've learned and what it looks like. So specifics, okay? 6 to 12 pages, has graphs, diagrams, a bibliography. So you're going to have to do a little bit of research and source your research and put that into your paper round. This is an IB lie. They lie to you. They say it should take about 10 hours. It usually takes more. So it's not like, all right, I have nothing up on Saturday, I'll get my whole IA done. That doesn't happen. It takes probably more than 10 hours, and you probably can't sit and do it 10 hours straight. So we have a bibliography, have a works cited section. Maybe you have some images that you stole from the internet. Have that cited. Okay? This is not a regurgitation or a historical essay. This is how Pythagorean discovered a squared plus b squared equals c squared. He lived in this day, and this is his friend, and blah, 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 and this is the theorem, and blah, 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 and that's my paper. Thank you very much. No, it's not a historical or a regurgitation of facts. Okay, your target audience is that you are writing this so that you could give it to your friend and say, hey, check this out. This is really cool. So you want to make sure that it is written so somebody in the class could read it and understand it. They want you to use some sort of mathematical technology. So if you're doing graphs, you might want to use Desmos or use your graphing calculator. There's ways to get images from your graphing calculator onto Word so you can show exactly what you did. But probably Desmos is even nicer for that. And you're not expected to use any mathematics outside this course. So you don't want to pick a topic where you're like, ooh, I have to do advanced complex analysis for this. No. Okay? That choosing mathematics that's too hard usually means you end up losing math marks because you can't really explain what's going on as you're trying to do the math. Okay? Now, it is 20% of your IB mark and roughly about 10 to 15% of your school mark. And I'll show you how the school mark section works. What's going to happen? In class, we will today look at some examples and critique them. Brainstorm some research topics. We're going to do that today. Practice writing sample research questions, and you've already practiced. Well, due on Tuesday is your hanging chain activity. That's really practicing how to write things mathematically on the computer, how to insert images, how to write a little mini math IA. Okay? Discuss the details your exploration must include. So let's look at specifics. I thought we just did that. I must have not hit the button. There. What you will do on your own. You will write a research question. And this is not an English class where we're really creative writing, we're mathematicians. We can be blunt. In your introduction somewhere, you will probably, and it's okay to use, the aim of this paper is really clear, right? It's not sort of being like, oh, I wonder if they'll figure it out. I'll leave a little mystery. No, we're not trying to make anything mysterious or like use any kind of fancy metaphors to, this is maybe what I'll do in this paper. No, you want to be very clear. This is my aim, rationale. This is what I'm going to do in this paper. This is what I'm looking at. And this is, the aim is what I want to look at. Rationale, this is why, right? Ever since, I'm trying to think of topics off the top of my head. I was like, oh, maybe you chose COVID. Ever since I was young, I was hoping there would be a pandemic. No. But maybe there's some sort of personal connection to you wanting to study infectious diseases, and therefore you want to study how Ebola has been spreading, or how COVID spread, and look at the mathematics and data that is within that. Okay? You're going to tell me what your research question rationale is. That was that second page that I handed out. Sort of a little name, what your topic is, your aim, your rationale, what you're hoping to do, connections to the math you've done that it is. It's just a very rough, hey, I've got an idea, this is where I'm going. And for some of you, I'll be able to say, that's a cool idea because I can see that you're really personally engaged in that. The math, I think, is going to be hard. Sometimes people choose topics, and I'm going to say, look into it, try something, because there is possibilities of connecting everything to math. I gave you that example the other day, the person that looked at English grammar and wrote a math essay. Like, I would be like, I'm stuck. There's no way I could think of using mathematics to look at English grammar. But it is possible. So most things are possible, but some things are harder than others. Okay? Now, this is a little bit of a misnomer. I've tended, the word draft makes students think that they can, like, I don't know, you hand in your draft for English, it's like, this is my crappy copy, right? I didn't spend much time on it copy. So, when you hand in your draft, you are actually thinking, this is what I think my final copy should be. That's what you have to think of as your draft. You've gone through it, you've edited it, it's ready to go, and then you get the advantage after you've handed in your final copy for me to go through it, make some comments, tell you places where you could improve, and then you get that back and can make changes to make it better. Okay? But sometimes when students have used this word draft to think of sort of like, oh, here, I have 5 points. No. Okay? So I've really encouraged the students that do well, have used this well and said, I'm trying to get my final copy done, handed in before Christmas. Okay? So it's what your mindset should be. I want to get my final copy, edit your final copy to produce a final copy. There we go. New definition. Okay? When? So, we've got it today. We're going to try to, next week, have our topics ready and start writing, because next week is almost December, and then you'll have 3 weeks in December to write it, writing your final copy, and then I get to have the greatest Christmas ever, reading essays. Yay. And then we come back and we have interviews. And we say what's good, what we need to improve on. Okay? Okay. No final versions can be accepted late. Okay? No draft versions can be accepted late. Academic honesty, so you have to make sure that it's your own, and the reason they want you to choose a topic that's interesting to you and justify it, it's because then it's pretty easy to see if someone has plagiarized, right? When I was growing up in Australia, I really liked kangaroos. Like, you didn't grow up in Australia. You copied this from some Australian IB student. And you can see, so that's not a good idea. Plus, you have to show me things all the way through so that it's really obvious that you're the author of this authentic piece of work. Okay? Now, most often it's not like, oh, I'm going to let somebody else copy. You're doing different topics. Copying doesn't really matter. So, okay? So if you are found guilty of academic dishonesty, you get a 0 for your IA. Okay, these are the ones we have to erase. So we want to have our topics chosen by next week. Next week, Thursday, we have class. That's when that outline sheet needs to be handed in. So this one right here, we're thinking on this weekend, and by next week, Thursday, you're looking at handing in your outline. Okay, write your essay. Write your final copy, your essay. That is going to be due on December 19th. There is a checklist in, I believe it's in this, we'll double check it. If not, I'll give you a copy. That checklist will also be handed in on December 19th. This one, you don't have to make notes, I'll make it easy for you. You're just going to come to your interview. December 19th, you're also going to have a self-evaluation. So, I'm going to hand out to you a marking guide for your own paper. When you hand in your paper, you're also going to hand in what mark you think you did in each of the sections. Okay? Then these ones don't change, actually. Yes, they do change. I think I have January dates in here. Okay, we're going to make a schedule. When you get back in the first week in January, we're going to make a schedule to have interviews. Okay? And everybody's final essay is due 1 week after their interview. So everybody gets 1 week after their interview, which is fair, because it's not like you're going to be doing your interviews on Monday and somebody else is on Tuesday. It's not like you're going to be working hard on your essay Monday night while the other person doesn't. So you get 1 week after 1 week after your interviews to get your final copy. Okay? You hand in a final copy in paper, and you also have to hand in a final copy in as a PDF. Okay? That goes directly to the IB. It gets uploaded and sent off to markers somewhere in the world. IB evaluation is 20 marks. Communication, mathematical presentation, personal engagement, reflection, and use of mathematics. And these numbers are old up here. They are 4, 4, 3, 3, 4. Oh, they 4. I always forget. They switched to them. So, one of them's 4, one of them's 3. Okay? Now, different this year. Okay? It's not going to count as 300 points. Okay? It's only going to count as 150 points because your tests this year are going in as 100 points. 2 years ago, I made all the tests worth 200 points. So your tests were worth even more. They're a little bit less this year. But it's still worth 1.5 times for 150 points. And your first final draft, your final copy, is worth 20 points. So what you hand in on December 19th is worth 20 points. That doesn't come into effect in the IB at all. That's just, I want to see your final copy before Christmas. If that final copy is not in before Christmas, then you get 0 out of 20 if you miss that first deadline. Okay? Now, topics. I find that the ones that get used, are easiest to use, are using transformations of graphs. That's like your hanging chain one where you did the mathematics to do transformations to find that equation. If you can have an IA where you collect some data, that data gets put into a graph, that graph happens to be exponential, logarithmic, sinusoidal, and you can show that you know how to use transformations to find that equation, you're already showing math that's in this course. Okay? I find that non-graphical ones, there is lots of topics in exponents and logarithms that could be explored. One of the ones that I'm going to give you today is someone who explored the amount of drugs in your body. Okay? Over time, your body eliminates the drug from your body, happens to be exponential in the way that it does that. So then they could create data, they could create a graph, come up with their own equation, and sort of use transformations and exponents and logarithms at the same time. But there are a lot of logarithmic things. If you're into chemistry, right? Acidity, alkalinity, those are on a logarithmic scale. So maybe you like studying chemistry, you want to do something with pH scale. That's logarithmic. There's lots of equations. Another one that I'm going to give you today as an example was that one I talked to you about somebody's tea cooling. Temperature change, as temperature gets closer to room temperature, it follows an exponential graph. So maybe you want to look at something temperature related. That would follow that. Sound, decibels, is logarithmic. Earthquakes are logarithmic. Radioactive materials have half-life. That makes them exponential logarithmic. So there's lots, I would say, in exponents and logarithms that you could explore. Sometimes, though, also when you get into exponents and logarithms, and you get like half-life, that also then connects to geometric sequences, so that could connect to a topic that you could do as well. Okay? Not a ton with radians and arc length that you're going to be doing, although there are some people that look at sinusoidal functions, right? You could look at sunrise, sunset, different places in the world, and how that affects global warming, maybe because you're really interested in the environment. So then you could look at, well, I don't know if that affects global warming, but how the sun rises and sunsets at different places in the world, how does that affect weather? Maybe there's something there. Okay? Probably not too much with sine law and ambiguous space or cosine law, but you might solve something that uses that depending on what equation you come up with. Then statistics and probability, I just put a big check mark there. We did those units first. because there is stuff that is, if you want to do any kind of comparison, right? Does this affect this? Right? We're in a global shortage of stuff. We're looking at, you can get data to compare two things, look at the statistical regression. There could be stuff in statistics that you could study that way. Okay. Desmos I added on here because that one is a really good graphing one. But these are different things you can use for technology. Probably I would put your graphing calculator, Desmos. GeoGebra is really good as well as technological things you could use. Wolfram Alpha, have you ever seen that site? Okay, that's like the Google of math. You can say, what's pi to 500 digits? And it will calculate it for you. You could ask it, what are the zeros of 3x squared minus 5x minus 7? And it will calculate it for you. It will also do weird calculations like compare Canada to the US. And it'll give you every single numerical thing that compares Canada to the United States. Surface area, population, life expectancy. So if you wanted to do any kind of comparative between countries and stuff like that, Wolfram Alpha will be great data for you that way. Okay. How you are marked. These are the right numbers. You will get 4 marks for presentation. I changed it. It used to be called communication. It is now called presentation. Same thing. How does your paper flow? Is it easy to follow? One of the things that is listed here is if someone is reading this and if you're reading it, I have to go, whoa, what's happening? I'm not following what you're doing. That's usually going to be something taken off in your presentation. So how is it organized? Is it coherent? You can use little subtitles. Those are a nice way to, like, developing my model using transformations. It's like, I didn't really know how to nicely go from the last paragraph to this one. So I have a title that separates it and makes it clear. That is perfectly fine. Okay? So, is it easy to follow? In your introduction, you really say, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? Right? The aim of this paper is this. The rationale for the reason I'm doing this, that's your rationale, is because blah, blah, blah. Okay? Sometimes people rewrite their aim and rationale once they're done their paper. They're like, ooh, I actually didn't do what I said I was going to do. So I'm going to rewrite what I was going to do and actually say what I did. Okay? Appropriate language for your peers. If you have graphs, they're clearly labeled X, Y axes. They get fussy on graphs that they don't have a title. Have you labeled your axes? Have you added the variable that you're going to use? So really clear on all of those things. If you have to use some sort of sourcing, so if you take something in your paper, you should either use a footnote or however you are comfortable. There is no set, like, oh, you have to use MLA or APA or whatever the acronyms of the different formatting is for writing papers. You can choose one and just be consistent throughout. And even if you do it slightly wrong, it's not something that they dock marks for. They will just dock marks for you're not sourcing things, you don't have sources, you don't have a bibliography, then the presentation might lose some marks. And then you get a mark out of 4. And they're very vague descriptors, right? You could get a 3 out of 4 for being well organized and coherent. but not necessarily complete. So these are where the IB gives themselves leeway to dock marks easily. Okay, again, a good mark on a paper like this is 12 to 14 is considered a good mark. So they like to take marks off for each of the sections. But if you proofread your essay and there's no major woes, this is generally one where the marks are high, 3 or 4. Okay? Mathematical presentation. This is using the proper words, not using slang, using proper notation. So you can't like use a little hat button or a star for multiplication. They want proper mathematical notation all the way throughout. You've got a math definition, define it. Right? If something we learned in class, say a vertical translation is when the y values have been multiplied by a certain value, causing it to stretch away from the x-axis. You can, all of the things that you learned in class, you can actually be, with the math definitions, you can be a little bit boring in your paper. Because you know those definitions, but they're part of this curriculum, so you want to show the Tanzanian marker that you know what you're talking about, if these go off to Tanzania. Okay? So it's okay to be a little bit boring, but you don't want to like, mathematics adding is, we're not going to define things that are pre-knowledge for our course, but anything that's in our course, if you're explaining it, take the time to define it, right? Graphs should be included with a purpose, labeled, okay? 3 sig figs and approximation signs all the way throughout, okay? Formula, diagrams, tables, charts. So if you can show something, is that above us? Okay. So again, this is one too that generally you can get a pretty good mark on. 2 or 3. If you haven't made any mathematical mistakes, haven't forgotten any approximation signs, or 3 sig figs. Sometimes you might say, all of my mathematics is, I'm showing all the decimal places, and I've kept all the decimal places in my calculations until the final answer, and all of my final answers are rounded to 3 sig figs. Unless I needed something else, and you've explained that in there, that shows that you were thinking about this as you went along. Personal engagement. This is the one that they want you to connect it to yourself, but the more you connect it to yourself, the harder you make the mathematics. But if you make your mathematics easy, because you picked a topic that makes your essay easy, probably you're going to lose personal engagement marks. It's like a catch-22. It's very hard, right? You almost have to be lucky. Your topic that you're interested in just happens to fit perfectly with the math we learned. That doesn't happen very often. And so this is one where getting a 3 is evidence of significant personal engagement. And that's only 3 out of 4. And there's an abundant evidence of outstanding personal engagement. It's like, wow. That's it. So this one is the one where people are usually getting 2 or 3 out of general. Or a place where if I handed in and gave everybody 4s, then the markers say come back and they say no, that you were too generous on personal engagement. Now the dangerous thing about like how this is marked for the IB, it's out of 20 marks. I submit my marks. Then based on my marks, they randomly choose some. They usually choose some of my best scores, some of my worst scores, and some people in the middle. Then they reread my papers and look at how I marked it. And if they disagree with how I marked it, like they picked Sarah's, and they're like, you gave Sarah way too many marks. So as a punishment, we're not just going to take 2 marks off of Sarah's. We're going to take 2 marks off the entire class. that nice? On the flip side, if I'm really mean, they could go, you were really mean. We're going to give everybody one more mark. Okay? But, so I have to mark yours and then try to convince them that I did a good job of marking and that they shouldn't change their marks. And it's like hit or miss. Sometimes you get lucky and they're like, hey, everything's good. Sometimes you get super unlucky. I had one year where I got super unlucky. In fact, the first year that they changed things over, I even went, when they added statistics, they added, we can find the line of best fit. So I had a number of students who their main math was a line of best fit, but in the old curriculum, line of best fit wasn't allowed. So they added something in the curriculum, but the marker that I got that year was still thinking of the old curriculum, took 4 marks off everybody's paper. So the next year I was like, nobody's allowed to do linear regressions at all because I lost so many marks on it. But then I went to a conference and they're like, yeah, that was probably a mistake. We're sorry. Thanks. I felt terrible, right? Can you imagine? Like, I've tried, because I want to give you guys good marks, okay? But I have to kind of follow into their line, like I can't give you too good of marks, because then they're going to do it. And that year I was like, oh, so I just felt terrible all the way through. Okay. All right. Oh, I missed one. Reflection. Throughout your paper, you get a result, reflect on it. Don't just have so a reflection is not like, oh, I'm going to have a reflection section at the end. That won't go over well. Instead, here's my graph of my hanging chain with my equation. Here's the graph from my calculator. I like mine better because the calculator's is better because this is why I think this is different. And thinking about your results as you're going, reflecting often is going to be good for substantial evidence of critical reflection. Okay, critical reflection. Oh, I thought it was funny that the color was green for the regression and my color was blue. That's not good reflection, right? We're actually reflecting on the mathematics as we're going through. So it's more than just the conclusion. You are looking throughout it all the way through. You might reflect on, I've got a graph, and the graph works really well for these points, but it doesn't make sense when x gets really big or when x gets really small. I actually have to only consider the domain of the graph from here to here. And you're reflecting on what's good about the graph and what's not good about the graph. And then finally, 6 marks for your use of mathematics. Okay? If your mathematics is not considered at the level of the course, then the maximum you can get on that section is 2 out of 6. So if they like, oh, all you did was a squared plus b squared equals c squared, sorry, that is considered pre-knowledge to IB. We can't give you any marks for your mathematics. So we're looking for math, which is error-free, is within the level of the course. So when I read your final copy and I feel like we need to do more for the math in this, here's something we could add to try to beef up the math mark. But this is generally a place where it is, again, easy to get the 5 or 6. Okay, so the math part on the math essay is actually the easier part. The part that you would normally think would be an easy part, oh, connected to my real life, I should write about that. That seems to be where they take off some marks. Okay? So those are the sections that you're marked on. And one of the things you're going to do when you hand in your paper is give yourself a mark in each of these sections how you think you did. And I've added, you can read through each of these sections with the notes that I've added a little bit more. You have a separate paper with this on it. This is what you're going to hand in next week, Thursday. We'll just go through some helpful hints, okay? You're going to have your research question, your introduction. You're going to have your aim and rationale in your introduction. Create an outline while you're doing your research. What are the topics you want to do? And then you can just sort of, you know, these might be sections of your paper. I want to show this, show that, and I want to show this, and fill that out. Okay? Make sure you're keeping records of your bibliography stuff while you're going. It is harder to go back and find that stuff than it is while you're doing it. If you see something, write down all the information for the bibliography. When I used to write papers in university, the very first thing I would do is write up my whole bibliography. I don't know. It seemed like it should, you'd think it would be the last thing, but it was the very first thing. I wrote up my whole bibliography, all the sources that I had got already, wrote them up. If I decided not to use something, I could always take it out afterwards. But I had people going, oh, I forget where I got this quote, and then they try to find it, and they're like, oh yeah, it's from that book, but I didn't write down what page number it was. And it's like you're spending so much time after looking for those things. Make it easier on yourself. Okay, you need to round, consider accuracy. I would tend to say that I wouldn't round. All my calculations have no rounding until the end. Okay? Use approximation signs. Include page numbers, and your paper should not have your name on it, right? Because if it gets sent, I don't know, to Tanzania, and you have an uncle there, there's a lot of money. They don't want that to influence. They're like, oh, I recognize this last name. Better give it a try. Only use math that you understand. So if you don't understand the math, you shouldn't be doing stuff about it. It's just going to cause you problems. Because if your math is bad and you don't understand it, usually you lose marks in the mathematics section, and then also the communication or presentation section. They're like, you presented that terribly, I can tell you don't understand. So you get sort of docked in two different sections if it's not clear. So just don't do something super complicated that way. You can use I in this not formal, right? You have to be in third. Like, I found it fascinating that blah, blah, blah. I always wondered why this. When I looked at these graphs, I noticed this. Okay, so you can have that use of I kind of makes it more personal, shows a little bit of personal engagement throughout your paper. Okay? And you can consider, like, what are the implications for what you found? How is this going to affect things? Maybe you found something that you think could make the world a better place if they would only listen to you more. All right, discussing implications. What do they mean? That's a lot of reflections. Okay. Here's a growth chart. Right? Instead of just saying the graph levels off at x greater than 15, the graph levels off after the age of 16, because that's when people tend to stop growing. Okay, other reflection things, limitations, extensions. Right? Maybe you say, oh, it would be also very interesting to look at this part, even though I can't do this in my paper because my paper is already long enough. but this would be things that make me interested in further studies. So, add your own voice, and bibliography is there as well. Here's the checklist. So I had put on our things that we wanted to have the checklist as well. So when you're done your final copy, or when you're proofreading your own final copy, go through this and check off things. Did you do these things? If you didn't, you might want to go back to your paper and try to add these things. Right? You define key terms. You have page numbers. You end with a conclusion. Does it come back to your aim and rationale? Because your conclusion is basically your introduction. Instead of I want to show, or I'm going to show, I did show, sort of thing. Then we have our interview, and I'm going to run the interview to help you out as much as possible. So don't have to really worry about the interview. And then you have a self-evaluation. But, yeah, I think the numbers on this one might be personal engagements out of 3, and what did I say, out of 4. Okay. So, now, I end the video here.